And the other thing to remember is that silence never, ever, ever results in real change. And what we're looking for in this issue is real change. Now, many in the U.S. diplomatic community are uncomfortable with the concept of promoting religious freedom. It just feels uncomfortable to us, right? And I believe that it feels uncomfortable because they're confusing two very, very different things. It's one thing to promote a religion, a ideology, Christianity, right? And to go into another person's country and to say, here's our religion, here's ideology. That feels uncomfortable. But it's a very different thing to say, we're not promoting a religion, we're not promoting a ideology, but we are promoting the freedom to worship as you choose. We're promoting religious freedom, not one religion over the other. And I think it's important to distinguish those two so we can get past that roadblock, get past that initial conversation, which hangs us up so often on this issue. For a good chunk of my professional career, I've been able to work one-on-one with people who are fleeing religious persecution, people who are seeking asylum in the United States of America. And I worked on many cases of women who had endured female genital mutilation. And this is a horrible, horrible atrocity. And so we would talk as we went through the mini hearing that we were holding. And I'd say, well, you know, it says here that you consented to the act. She said, yes. Or they would often say, yes, I consented to the act. Of course I did. I said, okay, so you did it out of your own free will. Absolutely not. Well, what do you mean? I did not have a choice. The societal construct was set up in such a way, and the laws were established in such a way, that my lack of consent would equal blasphemy. And I had no choice. And I believed them because now they were usually sitting in front of me with a daughter. And they did not want to go back to their home country with that daughter. And the reason they did not want to go back is regardless of what they said about not wanting their daughter to undergo that procedure, they knew that once she was there, they would have no choice. So that's the difference. A society where you can express your religious faith, restrict your liberties out of your own free choosing, versus a society that creates victims and imposes their faith on people who don't consent to it. The right to self-determination and religious freedom are internationally recognized immutable human rights. So why are we so afraid to stand by those rights and to speak clearly with one voice? Faith is a powerful tool to shape men's concepts of who they are, their concepts of the rights you deserve, and where you fit into a society. And it is very important for a theocratic regime to oppose opposition who come from different religious viewpoints, because those different religious viewpoints encourage thought that it could be counterproductive to that regime. And we know this is true because today we're seeing in the form of blasphemy laws being passed all over the Middle East the manifestation of this ideology, where blasphemy laws prohibit religious expression for minority groups. And they have been passed lawfully, and they are done in the name of meeting the government's ultimate goals and government policies. So I think the United States should take two very, very important steps in order to speak out clearly and to have a strong voice against the persecution of religious minorities. The first thing is to publicly rebuke these blasphemy laws. Now, for those of you who don't know, blasphemy laws basically condemn to death anybody who speaks out against Islam. The problem with these laws is that they are incredibly subjective. And one of the things that is absolutely crucial for a law to be successful is that it is more objective than subjective. So when you have a law where the person reading the law can impose his beliefs on that law and how it should be applied, it becomes a very, very dangerous law. So blasphemy laws are incredibly subjective. They are not objective. Why not say something about that? And the U.S. could draw that philosophical line in the sand with the issue of the blasphemy laws. And blasphemy laws are very, very interesting because when they're passed, like in Pakistan, for example, they're not just passed on their own and then no other action is taken. Yes, they're enforced, but at the same time, what we're constantly seeing is private acts of violence that occur around the time that the blasphemy law was lawfully passed that silence people who speak out against the blasphemy laws. So last month in Pakistan, Minister Bhatti, who is the Pakistani minister of minority issues, spoke out very clearly against the blasphemy laws in Pakistan. And then he was killed. And he was the second of 2 ministers to be killed for speaking out against those laws. And what we also see is that the blasphemy laws, because of the societal precedent they set, condone private acts of violence against the individuals, against the group, against the religious minority. That is highlighted in those blasphemy laws. And so it's becomes a parallel track. It's very, very interesting. And it's not very different from what we saw in post-World War I Germany with the Nazi Party. They used legal mechanisms. They passed laws, actual laws, which treated people of the Jewish faith differently and took away their property rights, while at the same time instigating private acts of violence against that religious minority. A very, very interesting strategy that employed democratic means in order to achieve its goals. And what we're seeing now in Pakistan, I believe, is something very, very similar. And so would the world be different if the democracies of the world at that time stood up and said, you are using the mechanisms of democracy, you're using a legal system to disenfranchise a group of people, to take away their rights. And that is something that we will speak out loudly and clearly against. Would that have changed history? I don't know. But I think it's a good place to start. Because it is very easy to speak out against an atrocity after it has occurred, right? After Minister Bhatti has been murdered. That's horrible. We don't stand for murder. But it's difficult to speak out against something, against a policy at its inception, the passing of a law which restricts the rights of certain segments of society. So the first thing that I would suggest that we do is publicly rebuke the blasphemy laws. The next thing that I would suggest is that the U.S. tie acceptance of any foreign aid monies to a rule or regulation that prohibits governmental discrimination on the basis of race, gender, religion, political opinion, or particular social group. So in the instances of countries where the United States, or Canada, or Great Britain, or Australia are giving large amounts of foreign aid, why not say, in order to receive this aid, or as a condition of receiving this aid, there is a regulation which says that the government, not private citizens, but the government cannot discriminate against people based on their religion or a protected characteristic. That would draw a philosophical line in the sand and say, this is what the democracies of the world stand for. They don't stand for being able to treat similarly situated groups of people differently. And it is not okay to do that. What this would do in the long term, as that fledgling democracy or as that country develops, is possibly provide a legal right of redress for those individuals who were treated differently, who were discriminated against based on their religious beliefs or uniquely identifying individual characteristic, against the government for that government action. Now, I am by no means saying that the U.S. should cut diplomatic ties with countries who engage in religious persecution. But what I am saying is that we should at least start to be mindful of it. We should start to pay attention to it. We should understand that it is a foreign policy, that promotion of religious freedom is a foreign policy goal. So let's be strategic in our approach in achieving this foreign policy goal. And let's take a step back, and especially in instances where a country is receiving large amounts of monies from the United States, say to that country, these are the principles we stand for. These are internationally recognized human rights. And if you're going to receive this money, if you're going to play ball with us, then these are the things that we need you to pay attention to as well. It would be an interesting first step in a very, very long road. America cannot be a force to solve the problems it faces if we are refusing to acknowledge those problems. A U.S. policy which constantly hedges its bets and fails to speak out clearly against religious persecution is a policy which sanctions religious persecution because of its silence on the issue. And if we truly want a world where individual rights are advocated for, where freedom and liberty are held by the individual, not by a state, and granted to that individual, then we need to start speaking up against the religious persecution that is happening all over the world. And we need to begin that process as soon as possible. Thank you.